I wake before dawn to the chorus of quacks and peeps echoing from the duck house. I am a duck farmer in the Mekong Delta of Vietnam, raising thousands of ducks from one-day-old hatchlings to market-ready adults in just 42 days. Each morning, I step into the warm brooder barn and am greeted by a wave of humidity and the earthy smell of rice husk litter. Tiny yellow ducklings scurry around my boots. It's a peaceful, hopeful sight, a new generation full of promise, and it fills me with quiet pride and determination. Outside, the tropical sky is streaked with pink and gold, but dark clouds on the horizon hint at the challenges that come with our climate. On this large-scale modern farm, we have metal-roofed sheds and automatic feeders, yet nature is always in charge. The monsoon rains can pound our rooftops for hours, turning the yard to mud and pushing humidity to nearly 100%. In this damp heat, I've learned you must be vigilant. I work in a high-tech but rural setting where tradition meets technology. The sheds are equipped with fans and heat lamps to keep the fragile ducklings at around 30 degrees C in their first days, since they can't regulate body temperature yet. I've arranged the lamps in circles, and I watch the ducklings closely if they huddle tightly under the light. I know they're cold. If they scatter and pant, it's too hot. Adjusting the lamps a few inches can make all the difference. Our climate swings from sweltering noons to cool, rain-soaked nights. I've seen midday temperatures soar above 35 degrees, leaving even adult ducks struggling to breathe. Unlike mammals, ducks can't sweat, and instead pant desperately to shed heat. By evening, torrential rains can drench the farm, and a chill wind might make the littlest ducks shiver. Balancing these extremes is an art and a science. Roll up the curtains, for breeze roll them down when the rain blows in. Add another layer of dry straw in the cold pre-dawn hours. Every day is a battle with the elements, but I revel in it. This is the life I chose and inherited, a life of care, worry, and love for these birds. Despite all my preparations, nothing truly prepares you for the moment things go wrong. A few months ago, I faced the darkest hour of my farming career. It started innocently. One overcast afternoon, I noticed a couple of ducklings at the corner of the brooder sitting still with drooping heads. They didn't rush to the feeders as usual. I gently picked one up and my heart skipped a beat. Its tiny body felt cold, and it gasped silently, beak opening but no sound. I had seen healthy ducklings pant in heat, but this was different. By nightfall, a dozen were lethargic, some breathing with a faint rattle. I could feel panic scratching at the back of my mind. I am responsible for each life here, and I was watching them fade before my eyes. Over the next 2 days, my worst nightmare unfolded. More ducklings fell ill, dozens at first, then hundreds. I would enter the barn to find small, lifeless bodies under the heat lamps, their once bright eyes now closed. The sight made my chest ache with guilt and fear. I barely slept, spending nights cradling weak birds in my hands, trying to give them sugar water or antibiotics in desperation. Nothing seemed to halt the tide. Healthy birds became listless, their peeping grew faint. I walked the rows of heat lamps at midnight and felt utterly helpless. The sound of the barn changed. The usual happy chatter was replaced by an eerie quiet, broken only by an occasional gasp. Each dawn the pit of my stomach would churn as I gathered the little bodies. By the end of that week, I had lost nearly half my flock. Around 50% of my precious ducklings were gone, an almost catastrophic mortality rate. In 6 years of duck farming, I had never seen death strike so swiftly and silently. I remember one rain-soaked evening slumping against the barn wall, exhausted and despairing, listening to the rain hammering on the tin roof. I felt tears mix with the sweat and rain on my face. I asked myself if I was cut out for this. How could I face my family, my workers, and even myself after losing so many ducks? These ducks are not just numbers or inventory. They are lives that I nurtured from day one. Each loss felt like a personal failure. In that low moment, I considered giving up selling off the remainder and quitting the farm. But as I sat there, a weak chirp sounded near my feet. One tiny duckling, still alive, wobbled toward me and nestled against my boot, seeking warmth. That fragile life, in the midst of so much death, sparked something in me, a fierce resolve not to surrender. I gently scooped the duckling up and made a silent promise: I will save the rest of you. I will not let this happen again. The next morning, I called for help. Swallowing my pride, I contacted a veterinarian and an older farmer mentor, describing every detail of the crisis. We performed a careful post-mortem on a few of the ducklings, and what we found stunned me. Their tiny lungs had yellowish-gray nodules and a fine, powdery mold growth inside. It was aspergillus, a fungus. The vet diagnosed aspergillosis, a fungal infection that had spread through the barn. The damp litter and possibly some moldy feed created a perfect breeding ground for fungal spores which my ducklings inhaled. Once inhaled, the spores attacked their lungs and air sacs, making them struggle to breathe until they could no longer fight. And that wasn't all. The vet suspected mycotoxins, poisons produced by fungi in the feed, were also at work. We sent a feed sample to a lab, and the result confirmed that the feed was contaminated with aflatoxin, a toxin from Aspergillus mold. I felt a jolt of recognition and horror. In our rush, we had stored some sacks of feed in a corner that sometimes got wet in the rain. The feed had gone bad, invisible mold threading through the pellets. By feeding it to the ducks, I had unknowingly poisoned them. Ducks, I learned, are extremely sensitive to these toxins, far more sensitive than chickens or other poultry. A tiny amount of aflatoxin that might not faze a chicken can be deadly to a duckling. The combination of infection mycosis and toxin mycotoxicosis was a double punch that my birds could not withstand. Knowing the enemy gave me a new sense of purpose. The conflict had come into focus, and now it was time to fight back. I rolled up my sleeves and got to work with a mix of urgency and hope. First, we removed every bit of the suspect feed and discarded it far away. I scrubbed the feed bins and troughs with hot water and disinfectant. We decided to change our feeding system entirely. Instead of storing large quantities of feed on site for long periods, I shifted to a system of more frequent smaller deliveries from the mill so feed would always be fresh. We also upgraded our feed storage to waterproof containers and added drying agents to the storage area to keep moisture out. No more feed would ever sit and mold in a damp corner. I had learned that leaving feed out for too long or letting it get moist was an invitation for fungus. In fact, simply providing fresh feed regularly and cleaning out old feed can prevent fungal contamination of feed and litter. That line from a manual rang true in my head: stale feed and wet bedding are ticking time bombs. From then on, I made it a rule: feed is changed twice a day, every day. No exceptions. If any feed is left in the trays after a few hours, it gets removed so it doesn't grow mold. The feeders and drinkers get scrubbed daily. These practices felt almost extreme, but I knew they could spell the difference between life and death for my ducks. Next, we tackled the environmental conditions in the barn. I realized that the tropical climate which we duck farmers in Vietnam both rely on and curse had contributed to the disaster. The week of the outbreak, heavy rains had kept everything damp, and my brooding barn's ventilation hadn't been enough. So we made changes. I installed additional fans and a better ventilation system to keep air moving even during downpours. We brought in new dry rice husk litter, several inches deep, and made sure to replace any wet patches of bedding daily. The vet reminded me that dry, good quality litter and feed along with strict hygiene are the best prevention for aspergillosis. I took that to heart. Now I am almost obsessive about dryness. I regularly crawl on the barn floor feeling for any dampness and immediately add fresh dry litter on those spots. We also sprinkled a mild antifungal powder under the litter as an extra precaution. Temperature control became another key focus. I fine-tuned the brooding temperatures and humidity. Instead of relying on guesswork, I bought extra thermometers and even a hygrometer to monitor conditions at duckling level. I kept the brooder around a steady 28 to 30 degrees for the first week and then gradually reduced the heat as they grew feathers, being careful never to let them chill. At the same time, I ensured we didn't create a stuffy sauna ventilation, had to balance the heat to keep the air fresh and dry. It was a tricky dance. Too much heat and humidity could encourage fungal growth too little, and the ducklings would be weak and cold. I discovered some simple yet critical techniques. For example, raising the heat lamps a bit each day to slowly acclimate the ducklings to lower heat, and opening vents in early morning to release moisture before the day grew hot. When the sun blazed at midday, I hung wet burlap sacks in the doorways and turned on misting fans to cool the air just enough to take the edge off the heat without soaking the litter. Each age required adjustments, but by paying close attention to the ducks' behavior and the barn climate, I managed to keep them in a comfort zone. The difference was visible. The ducklings were active, eating well, and their chirping sounded happy and strong. Water management was another lesson learned. Ducks love water. If left to their own devices, they would splash all day. But spilled water was our enemy since it soaks the litter and invites mold. So I modified our drinking system. We moved from open trays to nipple drinkers with small cups, which still let the ducks dip their bills but greatly reduce splashing. In areas where we continued to use water troughs for the older ducks, I installed grated platforms under the drinkers to let spilled water drain away from the bedding. Every few hours, we checked the drinkers to make sure they were working and not leaking. Clean, cool water was always available, but the days of puddles in the barn were over. Alongside this, I instituted a strict schedule for litter renewal twice a week. We partially replace the bedding with fresh, dry material, and we completely clean out and disinfect the barn between flocks. It's back-breaking work shoveling out ammonia-soaked rice husks and spreading new bedding in the humid heat, but I now knew how vital it was. During this intense period of change, we didn't neglect the ducks' health care in other ways. The remaining ducks received extra multivitamins and probiotics in their water to help them recover from the stress. I consulted the vet about any possible treatments for aspergillosis, but in poultry there is usually no effective direct cure once it spreads. Instead, we focused on supportive care, keeping them eating and drinking and minimizing stress. Miraculously, a good number of ducklings pulled through. Their breathing steadied and their appetites returned. I will never forget the morning I walked into the barn and heard the sound of eager peeping and splashing at the water cups. It was the sweetest music after days of silence. I even allowed myself a smile as I watched them scurry to the feeders when I poured fresh crumbles. Hope, small and fluffy, was alive again in the barn. As the flock grew, I redoubled our biosecurity measures to guard against any other threats. We've always been wary of diseases like duck plague or avian flu in our region, so we already had foot baths at the barn entrance and required visitors to wear clean boots. But now I became even more strict. I set up disinfectant mats and made sure no one stepped inside without spraying their shoes. We placed screens on the barn windows to prevent wild birds from flying in, as they can carry spores and diseases. Rodent control was intensified so that rats or mice, which can spread mold by nibbling on feed, stayed away. And of course, we kept up with vaccinations and routine health checks. By 3 weeks of age, I vaccinated all surviving ducklings against duck plague, duck viral enteritis. I wasn't about to lose them to a virus after all we'd been through. Every day, I would walk among the ducks, not just to feed, but to observe them one by one. Any duck that looked sluggish or off balance would get my immediate attention. Early detection and action are now my mantra. The climax of this journey came quietly but powerfully. It was about 2 weeks after the crisis on a clear, hot afternoon. I stepped into the grow-out house where the older ducks roam and was greeted by a bustling sea of white Pekin ducks quacking and waddling eagerly toward me. They were big and beautiful, nearly full-grown at 6 weeks old, with clean feathers and bright eyes. The air felt fresh. The litter under my boots was dry and powdery, and the familiar moist, moldy smell that once haunted this barn was gone. I counted the ducks, as I always do, and realized nearly all the remaining flock had made it to market age. Against the odds, I had a healthy flock ready to sell. As we herded them onto the truck that evening, each bird a testament to resilience, I felt an immense wave of relief and joy. I gently picked up the very same duck that had huddled against my boot in that dark moment of despair. She was a plump, snow-white duck, now flapping her wings strongly. "You made it," I whispered. In her eyes, calm and round, taking in the world, I saw my own journey from fear to hope, from near defeat to hard-won triumph. Duck farming is tough, far tougher than I ever imagined on those idyllic mornings when all seems well. This experience nearly broke me, but it also remade me into a better farmer. I learned that success in raising ducks comes not from luck, but from knowledge, vigilance, and adaptation. I learned to listen to my ducks and to the environment. The slightest change in their behavior or the barn smell can signal trouble brewing. I learned that strict biosecurity isn't just a buzzword. It's the shield that protects your livelihood. Now I follow protocols: religiously clean boots, clean water, clean feed every single time. I learned that the tropical climate, with its intense humidity and heat, can be merciless if you don't respect it. You must adapt your farm to the environment because it will not adapt to you. Most of all, I learned not to take any day on the farm for granted. As I write this, the farm is bustling again with a new batch of yellow ducklings peeping and exploring their dry, warm, clean barn. I feel both the weight of responsibility and the swell of pride. Each life here depends on me doing things right. And when I see them thrive, growing strong and feathering out beautifully, despite the harsh sun and heavy rains, I know all the sleepless nights and hard work are worth it. There is no feeling quite like watching a flock of healthy ducks waddle in unison, knowing how close I came to losing them. To any beginner duck farmers out there facing challenges, I want to say this: don't give up. You will face fear and despair at times. Maybe it's a disease outbreak or a bad storm or prices falling. There were moments I thought I'd lost everything, but ducks are resilient, and so are farmers. If you pour your heart into learning and improving, the ducks will reward you with their growth, their cheerful quacks, and ultimately a good harvest. Remember that every problem has a solution hidden in plain sight. In my case, the feed and temperature things I can control were the key. The next time you step into your barn at dawn, take a deep breath. Smell the air, feel the temperature, listen to your birds. Those senses are your early warning system and your guide. Farming ducks is not easy. Nothing worth doing ever is, but it is deeply rewarding. It taught me the hardest lessons of my life and gave me the greatest joys in return. Now, when the monsoon clouds gather or the heat rises, I no longer feel dread. I feel prepared. I stand in the doorway of my duck house each evening watching the ducks snuggle into the fresh bedding, and I am filled with gratitude. We endured the storm and emerged stronger. My ducks are living proof that with knowledge, hard work, and an unwavering commitment to adapt and protect your flock, a farmer can overcome even the fiercest of challenges. This is the heart of duck farming in Vietnam: hope and resilience amid the mud and rain, and the unshakable belief that tomorrow's sunrise will bring a better day for both farmer and duck alike.